about this from last night and checked it out a little bit. Pretty complex shortcut that he's got here. So it looks like it's kind of just like a super configurable launcher thing. So like basically when you just run it, um, it says you have no slots. What did you already put some things in there?
Yeah,
So
I
then it
got
asks you
a
to
I added a shortcut, a URL, and an app so that we can see
nice,
the full breadth of capabilities.
awesome, yeah. So before that, it asks you to start filling out stuff. So this is really cool because this is kind of like I wanted to add some functionality to SC settings like this, where it would give users the option to configure what they wanted on all the like the settings, like URL schemes, and so um, yeah, it's got a lot of stuff going on here. So it's kind of funny though, like launcher shortcuts. Like this, long story short, for me is like I don't know if I would ever really use anything like this per se because like I just use um just pull down on my screen and type an app in and launch it, or I
Yeah,
actually use the
Spotlight.
app library, Spotlight, yeah, or I just swipe right and use the app library. But at the same time, though, this is awesome, like just the way it's done, and then I could see it potentially being like an action button shortcut, which unfortunately I don't have an action button yet, so I will soon. I guess probably end of the year. But yeah, when I was scrolling through this, it is just I'm gonna definitely take some inspiration from this. Um, yeah, it looks like he's using a lot of V card menus, which we could potentially replace with our.
Menu generator.
Anyway, so I mean, Ken, what did you think of it? Did you actually start using it as far as just a little bit of stuff?
Yeah, so I played with it a little bit, um, just adding it in. There's a few corners that need to be rounded off, but I think that regarding what you said about launcher shortcuts, for the most part, you're right. A lot of the functionality can just be found in Spotlight, but I don't think Spotlight at the moment lets you run a shortcut by name. And so,
Yeah, I don't think
let
so.
me
You're
see if
right.
that's actually true. So like if I type in, oh, never mind, it does. Okay. Yeah,
Nice.
so, arguably these launcher shortcuts are, given that you can do most of this stuff via Spotlight, these launcher shortcuts are kind of, I think, more like academic. They're cool proofs of concept for
Right.
seeing how you can put together a nice looking user interface using the things like the choose from list and vcard menus inside of shortcuts. And it does what it sets out to do. I had some issues when I was trying to assign custom icons for the Routinehub page and for the Actions app. And there's a couple things that don't quite work right on Mac OS, but that were working good on iOS. But so it does what it's supposed to do. So if I tap the Gemini via API shortcut that I added as a slot, it runs the shortcut, and then I can go ahead and like go through with that shortcut. And so it works. And of course, unlike Spotlight, you get these additional permissions dialogues. So the first time that I tried to open up Routinehub via this shortcut, it asked for permission to open a URL and stuff like that. So there's
Right.
there's sort of some built-in drawbacks from using shortcuts to do just about anything, because Apple has to try really hard to make sure that shortcuts can't be used maliciously, uh, which is sort of the downside of being able to share a shortcut. But the thing I liked about Launcher was that it's very simply done. So It's a good example of proper data organization inside of a shortcut. So
Yeah.
instead of having these like text actions that store base 64 text strings to represent images, all of this stuff is buried inside of a dictionary so that you don't have to look at it. I remember the first time I opened up a shortcut that was using a stored base 64 string for something. I think it was like the eject water from your speakers shortcut. And like the first time I saw that, I didn't realize that all he did was take a sound file, convert it to base 64, and copy the string, and then save that inside the shortcut. The first time I saw that, I thought it was magic. I thought it was like there's some hidden language in shortcuts, and somehow this string equates to this sound. It didn't make any sense to me at all. And so it's nice to just hide that kind of stuff away from the user, since shortcuts makes it easy to open it up and see what's happening. And then the rest of so you can see here like where he's building the vCard menu, where it says photo encoding B. So right here is a base 64 string, but he's just accessing it from the data dictionary at the top of the shortcut. And so you don't have to
Right.
you don't have these massive base 64 strings in here. And so like I think that's a really nice touch. Also,
Yeah.
the other thing that Launcher does that I like compared to some other shortcuts that try to provide a repetitive user interface is that it doesn't stick everything inside of a giant repeat block. Instead, it utilizes recursion, where the launcher shortcut will run the launcher shortcut. And so it can just keep going without needing to have a repeat loop. And so that makes the overall structure of the shortcut a little bit easier to look at. And it's a really well done shortcut, really well organized. You can tell this isn't his first shortcut. Oh yeah, we forgot to mention. So this is Launcher by INA Coding, who is not in the audience, but shout out to INA Coding. This is a fantastic shortcut. I think it's a really cool proof of concept. At the moment, it doesn't do anything that Spotlight doesn't do, but it's a pretty good example of a nice vCard user interface and the ability of shortcuts to run an app, to run another shortcut.
Right.
And it doesn't require any modification of the shortcut to run. So if you have another shortcut that you want to run, so say I want to run the airdrop shortcut from Launcher, you just go through the user interface. You select the folder that the shortcut is in, and then it loads up all the shortcuts with their icons. It looks really nice, and you just select the one that you want.
Yeah. So the one thing I think it can do that Spotlight can't is so the URL action, you can probably paste a settings URL scheme in there.
Yeah, so you could
Yeah.
use that for quick access to like Wi-Fi, but then
Yeah,
again,
or a bunch of different deep buried settings or whatever.
yeah,
But
so
yeah.
like Spotlight also does that to some degree.
Yeah.
So like I can just hop right
But you
into
still have to
Wi-Fi.
type it. Yeah, you still have to type it in and blah blah. But
And certainly,
so
as iOS continues to progress, we're going to see more and more of these shortcuts that are just trying to extend iOS become redundant and competitive with built-in operating system features. But regardless,
yeah,
I
so,
think it's a really cool shortcut for anyone who wants to dig inside the shortcut to see how to make their own user interfaces look nicer.
yeah. I still need to start trying to take advantage of the recursive functionality. I never. I think the last time we had chatted on the whatever we called it when we were talking about the menu generator, I'd never even considered that. That's an awesome way to not have a bunch of these if like 20 if statements or whatever. So
Yeah, if we end up getting through this whole list, then the very last shortcut that we'll review is one of mine, which has some really great examples of how a shortcut can feel more like a legitimate program through the use of calling itself to access different functions. And it's not entirely straightforward how to achieve it, but once you're used to it, it really helps you avoid having redundant actions in your shortcut. Like you can make a function for sorting a list, and now you can just call your own shortcut running the sort list function in multiple places inside of your shortcut. And it also allows you to have you could have a library shortcut that just contains a whole bunch of common functions that you find yourself utilizing in other shortcuts. And so it kind of opens up a whole new world of shortcut development. And of course, none of it is performant, since the more complex a shortcut gets, the slower it is. But it's a cool way to simplify the structure of the shortcut, make it a little bit more readable. Because otherwise, if everywhere that you sort a list, you have to have all the actions necessary to sort a list, it ends up just being really difficult to look at and digest what's going on inside the shortcut. But if instead you just see sort list and then run shortcut, and then you use the output of the run shortcut and you've got a sorted list, that's a lot easier for somebody to understand what's happening.
Piggybacking off of that, I'm going to just throw this out to the universe because I'm hoping someone has a better answer to it. And if you get to it, Teals and Co, great. What would be the equivalent of like a switch case? Because that's the thing I find myself struggling with is if else, if else, if else. I'd rather just have a switch somehow. Maybe there's a creative way to do that.
I mean, so in general, like shortcuts, since you can't have compound conditionals, so like if you want to check if two different things are true at the same time, it's kind of difficult to do that. And so the if mechanism, the conditional programming mechanism inside of shortcuts is sort of intentionally oversimplified, I think. And if there's no overlap, so for example, in a switch case, in a programming language like C, for example, it's generally assumed that only one case is going to be triggered. And if that's the case in your shortcut, then you don't need any of the otherwise blocks. So you don't need if, otherwise, and then you stick another if inside of the otherwise block. You can just use if and then end if and just have one if after the next. That way everything stays one level deep instead of having nested if statements. But
I see. Okay.
But for the most part, like you're stuck with if statements. There's no real syntactic equivalent to a switch case.
There you go. I threw my ass to the universe and I got the answer back. Thank you.
No problem, Chris.
Yeah.
And for the audience, Chris he's the father of Routinehub, and so thank you for joining us, Chris. We appreciate you being here.
And thank you guys. I always enjoy these discussions. And please, everyone, consider this a place for you to ask the hardest question or the easiest question. I really think there's a lot of value to be gained from just questions in general. So please do. And in the meantime, thank you guys.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. Shortcuts, it's designed so that people who have no programming experience whatsoever are not scared of trying something inside of shortcuts. And so if you've got any programming experience or even just experience with shortcuts, it's a fantastic place to pass on your own knowledge to people that are just starting off. And then even if you're a seasoned programmer, so I've got a lot of experience with Fortran and C++ and Python and now Julia, and shortcuts is like the worst programming language that's ever been invented. And so it's interesting. It's a funny type of challenge. It's like giving a master carpenter, a screwdriver and a bottle of Elmer's glue and asking him to go build something that he's more accustomed to building with a full toolbox.
It's a good example.
And so it really, so like one of my shortcuts, the photo collage shortcut, the whole reason that I did that was because it irked me that there's no way to deal with multidimensional arrays in shortcuts. And one day while I was I don't even know, trying to fall asleep or something, it occurred to me how I can twist shortcuts arm in order to get the behavior of a multidimensional array. So for example, having like rows and columns, if you wanted to be able to modify a particular element at row 5, column 2 in some array, like shortcuts doesn't have a way of doing that that's straightforward. But once I thought of a way to do that, all of a sudden I thought, oh wow, if I can do that, then I can do the entire photo collage program, which previously was just a Python program. And then in the process, I had to overcome all these other limitations of shortcuts. And it was a really educational experience, because now I don't think there's been a single instance since I finished that shortcut where I've had to do something and it wasn't immediately obvious to me what the process was to get shortcuts to do it. So it kind of just pushed the limits to their extreme for me.
There may be even a way to twist shortcuts arm to figure out switch statements or switch case.
Yeah, like another example. Oops. Another example I can think of is that they have repeat blocks, but there's no while loop. And if you're not familiar with programming, a while loop is it's a loop that continues to repeat until some condition has been met. And in shortcuts, you can repeat a certain number of times, or you can repeat over some collection of items, but there's no way to just repeat until a condition is met, and also there's no way to break out of a repeat loop. And so you might think, oh, well, I don't need a while loop, I'll just repeat 1,000,000 times, which you can do, but there's no way to break out of that loop. And so if you put a repeat 1,000,000 times action in your shortcuts, it'll sit there for 5 minutes after your condition has been met until it exhausts all the prescribed iterations. But
could you put an if statement before something that potentially, so a count and then an if statement that then repeats count times?
Yeah, so that's
still
kind of the best that you could do, is like you could you put the entire contents of the repeat inside of an if statement inside the repeat, and then you maintain this variable that says should break or something, and if should break is false, then it executes whatever's inside the if statement, and then once the if statement runs, or once the condition is met, you set should break to true, and now it just loops, and all it has to do is check should break again and again and again and again and again until you're all out of iterations. But it still takes forever because shortcuts is just so slow. Like, if you did a Python and like I don't even know if it's a fair comparison to say that if you did a Python loop that looped 1,000,000 times and didn't actually do anything inside the loop, it wouldn't take any time at all, because I'm pretty sure that Python is advanced enough to look at what's going on inside the loop and say, it's not doing anything, I'm just going to skip out of this.
Right.
Because like other programming languages, you have like a compiler, or in Python's case, an interpreter that's at least very advanced. But the way that shortcuts is built, each action is essentially running its some precompiled binary program somewhere. And like an if statement has no idea what's going to be inside of the if statement, and shortcuts itself has no idea what's going to be inside of the if statement. It's basically just like a really simple scripting language where every single line is executing a different program. And so beyond that, there's no optimization to be had, really. But I digress. To finish that last point, there's no while loop in shortcut, but you can achieve the behavior of a while loop through recursive calls. So what you can do is you can have a shortcut where all it does is check some condition, and then if the condition is, for example, true, then it will run itself again. And once the condition is false, then it quits. And there's still a limitation there, because who knows how deep the call stack is allowed to go in shortcuts. So how many times a shortcut is allowed to call a shortcut that calls a shortcut that calls a shortcut. until the Shortcuts app says, hey, this is consuming too much memory, I'm just going to quit. And so you still don't get a true while loop out of it, because a while loop, if you just say while true, then you get an infinite loop that never breaks. And that's not necessarily a good thing, but there's no way to replicate that behavior in Shortcuts. But you can use recursive calls to get, for the most part, the behavior of a while loop. There's a few Reddit posts on this topic. But moving on, the next one.